Cool. Let's ask you another question. Uh, when did you realize our academic institutions were tainted by ideology?
Well, the first time I had an experience with this was in eighth grade, where we had a class about white privilege and how they were telling us, and this was a like 99% white private school. So this isn't just in public schools, it's also in private schools, but they were telling us about our white privilege, and I was the first one to stand up, raise my hand, and say, actually, I have black family as well, and they don't believe that. And my dad, who's white, grew up poor. He worked hard and he got a little lucky too, and now he's at the place he's at. And trying to explain to not only the rest of the class but my teacher about how that's just not true. Then I go home with my sister. I'm walking to the bus stop, and one kid that was in the same class as I was said that I was defending white supremacy. So that was the first time I got to see not only um, how schools were becoming these indoctrination centers, but also how the students were being turned into some of the aggressors against people with different opinions.
That's interesting. I what the thing that you said about eighth grade, about you first encountering this in eighth grade. I have friends myself who are my age, and they tell me in private. They say, Daniel, this ideology, it starts really early. I have one of my friends. I remember we were walking and she told me that they're already teaching her little brother this stuff, and her little brother's in middle school. And so it's very is crazy how early this is starting. But it's not crazy actually once you get into the inner workings of the ideology, which we will get to in a moment. Another thing you said was about private institutions also being in, also, I guess, indoctrinating our children. Barry Weiss had this fantastic piece that she wrote on her Substack about the miseducation of America's elites, and she was talking about how students in Harvard Westlake were learning about how evil capitalism was, even though Harvard Westlake is an extremely expensive school. Is a really, this stuff is pervading a lot of our schools, no matter what type of school it is. Right? I go to an elite school as well. You don't have to pay for it as a public school, but I agree with the point that you made that at this point is either you get taught nothing. In inner cities, schools are uh there are high schoolers who only know reading, writing, and math at elementary school levels in inner cities. Teachers unions have fought hard to keep our schools closed, even though there's a ton of empirical evidence on the contrary. So you're right. Like, is for schools right now, it's either you don't learn anything or you get indoctrinated. So I I'll ask you another question. What do you think is the biggest issue facing America right now?
I would say that, and I'm not just saying this to stick on the topic of education, but I think it's still education because of, I mean, how education affects people. If people aren't educated on, I mean, at least their basic rights, they don't know how to defend their rights, which is a major problem. If they're not being taught to read or write well, cursive isn't really taught anymore, which is a small but important skill to have. Math as well, they don't do a good job on that. And like you said, especially in inner cities, it's really terrible. Um, and of course, that's mainly the blue Democrat controlled areas. And they go around saying how, oh, we love minorities, but then they screw them over time and time again. So it's really education once again, because if kids were more well educated, then I think this country would have been in a much better spot by now.
I think I agree with you because at first our public schools were not even doing us any favor, but not really accurately teaching us the Western canon. A lot of people went through school without knowing what makes America so great. What are the underlying philosophical gears that are running and uh fueling one of the greatest countries alive. So in the first place, we weren't learning anything about true Western philosophy, or and I'm not even just talking about John Locke or John Locke and people like that, but I'm talking about way back to like classical Greece, where the classical Greek period, where we had Heraclitus with the Logos, with Pythagoras, right? The Pythagorean theorem. We don't learn about these people. We don't really learn much about Aristotle, about Socrates. So and we still have the Socratic method, but people don't really know much about Socrates. So we aren't even taught the Western canon in the first place. And now on top of that, we have an ongoing indoctrination that actively uh tells us critique our to critique Western civilization without merit, right? Critical theory in general, seek to critique, and they don't care whether that criticism is maintained by empirical methods.